Okay, I think we can take a slow start here. It's 5:35. I want to welcome everybody. I see the numbers going up. I'm very excited as I am sad that today is the last day of our OG Cannabis Accelerator. I think the name Opportunity Grows is very fitting for what's going on in New York State, and it's been a absolutely wonderful program from at least my seat so far. So very excited to get going today.
But Eric, before we get started, the important stuff. How was your Thanksgiving dinner?
I knew it. It was awesome. Thank you so much. Went over to our dear friends, the Kerbers, brought mom with us. I love roasted vegetables, and I share that same passion with the hostess, and it was absolutely wonderful. How about you, my friend?
It was great. We had 19 people at the table, something we really missed last year. And I felt safe, and fun was had by all. And we are still enjoying the leftovers here. So we continue to celebrate Thanksgiving in some sense.
Oh, that's awesome. Good. Wow, 19. That's pretty good. We might have been close to that. We all got tested actually at the party, which I thought was kind of a nice addition. Again, I want to just thank all of you, our participants, for joining us. I want to thank Peter and Jean for joining us a little bit later. I was joking with Ari today. We're going to talk about some financial stuff with the business model canvas, and then with our guests. And I feel like I'm the abacus to these high performance computers that are going to be speaking throughout today. But I'm excited to do it and share this time with you. So let's get into it. There we go. Oops. There, that is my home. This is the Kauffman Incubator. We are located in Broome County, New York, Binghamton to be specific. We are associated with Binghamton University. I'm a university employee. We opened in April of 2017. We currently have 65 startup members. 10 of them are actually international. It's absolutely fun. We have companies from Ireland to New Zealand, and we love working with them. And since our opening, collectively, our companies have raised 118 million through investments. Not too shabby, especially this last year. And we are just really proud of the companies we get to work with. If anyone wants to learn more about our programming or to sign up for our newsletter, please check out thekauffman.com. We'd love to hear from you.
And Eric, do you have to be in the Southern Tier to participate in Kauffman programs, or could you do like what we're doing tonight here and in the Accelerator, could you be a remote member of the Kauffman Incubator?
That's a great question. Thanks, Ari. We actually do have a virtual membership. I'm actually working with a couple companies, one in Serbia and one in California. So we absolutely can do that. And our webinars are all free. We would never charge for the webinar. So please sign up and check it out. Get to know who we are. So thank you for that question. I want to point out this page. You probably have seen it at least once because that's how you registered for this. But at the very bottom of the OG Accelerator page, we have our quick links to resources. This is where you will find our videos. ArcView was very generous in providing an incredible resource list. I'm going to be spending some hours on those resources. Thank you, Gene. As well as a business model canvas and some other materials as they come up. So please check those out. When it comes to the videos, I will say it takes a little bit of time to get them from Zoom and then a little bit of time to get them up to YouTube, but we will be hopefully getting the video of today out by the end of the week. Oh gosh, there's me. So I am the director of business incubation programming for Binghamton University and the Kauffman Incubator. I love talking about the business model canvas, which is probably why I scored this job of the first half of this presentation. I've been lucky enough to speak nationally and internationally on the subject. And when it comes to the cannabis world, I have a little bit of familiarity to it, having started a CBD company some odd years ago, now exited. But I actually got my start at the Culinary Institute of America. I was a chef. Later became a clinical dietitian. That's right. When we talk business models, I know how to get you overweight and how to get it all to disappear. You just have to pay me twice. See, it's the whole business model canvas thing. And the reason why I eventually became an entrepreneur is because I started as an inventor, and I have a couple patents pending out there and some other stuff. And that basically is me. But that's not why you're here. We are here to talk about costs and revenues. Fun stuff, right? We all like the whole revenue word, and we all fear that whole cost word. But you know what? That's probably a pretty good sentiment to have, which is why proper planning prevents poor financial stuff. There we go. But we're not only going to do that. I do want to spend a quick second drawing a summary to our lessons on the business model canvas, because that's what I do. So we might as well make a little time to do that. So if you remember my little imagery of the business model canvas being a theater, well, today we have finally made it to the ticket booth. I like to think of cost structure and revenue streams as really where that synergy with our customer comes in. So, you know, what I'm talking about here is when you pay for something, when you price something or come up with different savings plans or anything involving finances, we're creating an emotional relationship with our customer. I have always remembered a lesson from the Culinary Institute. We were in the front of the house and we were talking about wine, which only happens once in a little while in the culinary world. But we were talking about how to price wine for the front of the house. Most restaurants do a flat percentage, 30, 50% above the price. Well, that kind of sucks. I personally hate that because, you know, if I'm buying a wine, I might know what that wine costs at the grocery store. And then I'm like, oh God, I'm going to pay 2 times that amount over this dinner. And I remember the teacher saying he chose a very different approach, and he just did $12 profit over whatever bottle they had. And if you think about that, you know, as a customer, if you actually learned that pricing model, you might say, well, $12, that's not bad because, you know, they open it for me and they have the wine glasses. But you see how just the idea of pricing something creates a very different emotional response in your customers.
And where is this restaurant, Eric, with the $12 pricing scheme?
I think it's long gone, to be honest. It's a great question. I would have loved to have given him props. Those guys at the Culinary Institute are just brilliant. Let me tell you, guys and gals. Yeah, I have a lot of lessons learned, especially if you see my cooking photos. So let's define these two things quickly. Cross cost structure. Basically, what are the costs incurred to operate our business model, right? So we can create this awesome business model, right? I have this wicked cool delivery car, and every time it hits 65 miles an hour, it goes back in time, and I can pick stuff up from it, you know. But the cost of actually creating that card and running that's not going to be practical, right? And I know that's an extreme example, but you would not believe how often people don't actually trace all the costs that are actually associated with the model that they've chosen, only to realize later on that, hey, this isn't going to work. So we need to figure these things out. And then revenue streams, a little bit easier to understand. This is basically the money that we're generating per customer. But you'll see that there's a lot of different things to consider when it comes to revenue and different things that we should maybe look at achieving when we design our revenue streams for our business. So I'll get into a little bit of that later. So let's go over just some types of costs. The first one being one-off costs. So this is basically that kind of initial cost that you as a business might have that could be buying your greenhouse, or maybe it's fitting your shop or office, or building your website. But we have this one-off cost that really we have to plan. We have to figure out what is that initial demand of finances that we're going to incur to get into this business. Now we have ongoing costs. So this is a really important one in my opinion, because a lot of it has to do with people, right? An ongoing cost is staff. How much staff do we need? And we have to make sure we're paying people a proper salary, but also raw materials. You know, if you're growing, are you making sure that nutrients or anything else that you're doing is part of your costs? Okay, maintenance of equipment, a huge one. I don't think everyone realizes the day you buy a piece of equipment is very similar to the day you buy a car. It starts losing money instantly, or at least value in that. And so in order to slow down that degradation of value, we have to make sure that we're always maintaining things, and that has a cost. And then we have fixed costs. Okay, so this is a purchase that, you know, no matter how often we might be doing something, it's pretty much the same. So I just as a few examples, you know, maybe you're paying a social worker at your store to deal with people that might have situations arise, or a security officer that might stand at your door, or rent. No matter how many customers walk through your door, those things still have to be paid, and they'll be paid the same amount per your contract at least. And then we have variable costs. This is one I always like to think about my my energy costs. I prefer to you know, have a fixed plan when it comes to energy, because when it comes to variable costs, they can change very rapidly. And so, for instance, if you had to buy containers to put your flour in for your store or for distribution, that cost that could change very easily depending on your distributor or how many of them you have to buy. So these things we have to really kind of figure out in our financial plan. If someone, you know, for instance, in this picture, in New York State, I believe we have to have opaque jars. And so how will future laws even change these variable costs? So again, these things we really have to be on top of. So a couple principles really to kind of think about when we think about our costs. Our fixed costs are generally more economical than variable. So that's kind of like my heating and electricity. I kind of prefer certain things to really be a fixed cost, because I know every month when I turn on the lights to my store or whatever, that cost is going to be there. I have to plan for it. Variable costs, however, are something that can really help you reduce your break-even point, or if you will, they can help you reach your economic goals. One way of doing that is partnering with someone. And we talked about key partners not that long ago. So can you bring on partners that can help alleviate the pain of certain variable costs? Or perhaps certain distributors or certain contracts you can get might be able to help relieve that. The problem, though, is when you have variable costs, you rely on someone else. And that's one thing you have to remember. Ari, please go ahead.
Yeah, you know, this has really been a great way to frame it. Very often I get asked, how much is it going to cost to launch a dispensary in New York City? How much is it going to cost to launch a craft grow? How much is it going to cost to become a high-end edibles maker and have sort of a cannabis bakery of sorts? And it's really hard to answer those questions with precision. I mean, it's almost like, Eric, if you and I, next time we go out for dinner, how much will that cost? Well, are we going to Chipotle or are we going to a 5-star Michelin restaurant? I mean, there's a lot of variables. Nonetheless, as a rule of thumb, as you move up the cannabis supply chain, so typically having a cultivation business requires a tremendous amount of upfront costs. Processing does as well, but a little less. And dispensary does as well, but also a little less. So maybe that's a helpful framework for people just to think about cost throughout the cannabis supply chain. And of course, there's ancillary opportunities. I know a lot of our participants have interest in delivery and consumption lounges, security businesses. I mean, there's a lot of ancillary opportunities here, logistics, and that typically has lower economic barriers to entry. And I think here in New York, particularly for those participants who qualify under the state's social equity and economic program, my hope is that the state really comes through with substantial loans for people to help with the startup costs, because as you know, you can't walk into your neighborhood bank and get a small business loan, not from the federal government, not from a neighborhood bank. So you really, the state has to go above and beyond to help, and I believe they will, to help address this issue of capital.
Yeah, brilliant. First of all, thank you. And yes, for those of you that are making business plans for banking or for investors, working on your business model canvas for your business partners or for yourself, you have to really not only understand the different costs, but be able to identify where they are and what they are, so that we really can move forward with knowledge, or what we like to say is move forward with a degree of certainty. And I'm pretty sure, anytime you're looking for investment, the investor wants to invest in a company that is certain, as opposed to uncertain. And really showing examples of how you understand your finances is a wonderful way of doing that. Because you're right, Ari, there's going to be a lot of changes in things, and that really could change the cost to play, essentially. So now those are just some examples of costs. I really want to get into cost structure now. And the way I like to look at this, cost structure really relates to your business model. So again, I always start everything with the business model canvas, because it's just a piece of Play-Doh that we can really kind of help mold our business model. But whatever it is you intend to do, it has a cost to it, right? There's a cost for whatever value you intend to provide to your customers. And that's why we need to come up with some sort of structure, so that we are actually doing this in a way that we will make money and not lose money along the way. So to define it, cost structure defines all the costs and expenses that your company will incur while operating your business model. So I really like that first sentence, because it's more than just saying, yes, okay, great. I make, red lunch boxes, whatever the cost is to make that box, that's my cost. But what I've kind of learned by working with a lot of startups is we tend to take on a lot of company costs that don't belong to your business model. And I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, but if you don't realize maybe travel and hotel and dinner as, these are key activities of me conducting business, but I'm just, spending the company money because, hey, this is company work that I'm doing. But you're not looking at that from the finances, from your profit and loss statements. And that's where we end up making a lot of mistakes, because we're not actually looking at all the costs that it takes to operate our business model. And if we have costs that are not part of that, then we need to do something about it. Either cut them out, replace them, identify them, add them to the model, but there can't be things that we are not accounting for. So in cost structure, we have two main categories: value driven and cost driven. I like to do my research before I buy things. Let's put it that way. And it's very interesting to look at the products that people are trying to sell to us and try to identify if they're really taking a value-driven approach or a cost-driven approach. And I think in my limited experience that in the cannabis sector, this is going to be a very important sort of idea or model for all of you to choose. Are you going to be a value-driven company or a cost-driven company? So value-driven, that's kind of, I think, an easy one to really understand. But these are companies like, as you can see, Prada, Rolex, they're going to make the best. We want our cannabis to, be wrapped in gold foil as its wrapping paper or whatever. But, we're trying to offer value, or maybe it's, offering that grade A+++ as opposed to what you might find in a general sense. And then the opposite is cost driven. So, these are people like budget airlines that said, hey, look, we want more people to fly, but it's expensive. And, we need to figure out a business model that makes flying a lot cheaper. And so you make people pay for luggage or for pretzels or whatever you got to do. But they end up becoming a very cost-driven business structure. So just to, again, kind of look at this a little bit closer for value-driven, I think this is, again, a very interesting one when we consider the fact that, let's be quite blunt, pardon the pun, that in the cannabis world, it's revolves on with farmers. We're growing things, and just like my organic vegetables, am I trying to buy value driven? Do I want just perfect vegetables with completely organic and they look great, they look awesome in the packaging? The packaging is completely biodegradable as soon as it touches water or something, and you got to think about what does that mean to me? And like I always say with the business model canvas, we have to make emotional connections to our customers. And some people, or with certain products, value driven is what people are looking for. But that's not for everyone. And that's where we can start to talk about these cost driven structures. Because, maybe when it comes to paper towels, I don't need fancy paper towels. I haven't really seen the value in fancy paper towels. So, whatever the cheap ones are, I can stock up in the basement. That's fine. And that's kind of this idea of cost-driven structures, right? People are trying to basically win that marketing share through economies, because frankly, no one wants to pay more than they have to, unless there's some reason to make them choose to do that. So if you are going for a cost-driven structure, so even in a retail store, there's very expensive retail stores, and then there might be retail stores that are more for everyone else. And so there's two things we have to consider here: economies of scale, right? So this could be one, well, I made my first store. Look, I just want to provide the best product I can to help people. I'm barely making anything on my store. But hopefully people just love it so much. They love the business model. They love the emotional connection that they have with us, that I'm going to start 5 more of these. And then, after the 5th one, now, okay, well, maybe now I can buy myself a car or something, because we're making money. And it's really based on this idea of scaling, right? So the more of this franchise, if you will, the more I make money. Or maybe I just need cultivation places throughout New York State, whatever it is, making money by growing your current business model, growing that scale, economies of scale. Walmart, I hate to use them as an example, but that's a great example, right? They're a ginormous company, which allows them to not only negotiate very cheap prices on the things they buy, but to also sell them very cheaply. And then we also have economies of scope. I'm a big fan of this one, to be honest with you. I know here I like to throw Amazon up. If you don't know, Bezos started Amazon by selling books. In fact, I remember using heft.com back in the day when I was in school. But what was very interesting was Mr. Bezos was able to create a very powerful business model and bring a lot of people into this e-commerce through buying books. And all he had to do was add more products onto the exact same model. And all of a sudden, his company starts to grow. So the reason I like this in the cannabis sector is because, your store, if you have a store, doesn't need to only sell flower, but maybe you're selling shirts, maybe you're selling classes, maybe you're selling food. There's all sorts of things that you can get into selling. If you're a grower, maybe you can sell nutrients, maybe you can sell light. It's adding these other products that make sense for you to be attached to. People trust that the stuff, or maybe it's not trust, maybe they just love the design or the branding, but whatever it is, we got to have it because you're selling it. Whatever it is, I want it. And that's the idea of economies of scope. And so really for the takeaway here, I have just 4 questions that I'd like people to ask themselves as they are working on their business model or their business plan. Where does our money get spent? This is a really good question. You could take this one to your household as long as my wife isn't listening when I say that, but look at all the places that your money is getting spent and start to question it. Can you get better deals, or can you move to different distributors? Can you take something away here that you're not using? But really look at your company. Where are there expenses that there doesn't need to be, or maybe they should be moved to some other category? Which costs are one-off and which are ongoing? Pretty important to know what costs you're going to have up front or at a certain month, and how it carries for the rest of the year, because you really should be making budgets for, as a startup, I like weekly budgets, monthly budgets, quarterly, yearly, 2-year, 3-year, 5-year. But you really need to know how often are certain charges going to happen. Fixed, variable, I think we get that one. But again, think about how you can use either of those to empower your business to be more competitive. And then, could we change our cost structure to improve our chances of success? Always. The answer should just be always, right? Because if there's anything you should learn about the business model canvas, is that after we master using it and understanding it and seeing patterns, we can then innovate on it and become a stronger company than our competitors. Okay, I think I'm still doing good here. So we are just going to jump into some types of revenue streams. Basically, to classify revenue streams at a high level, we need to look at the operating revenues, non-operating revenues. Okay, pretty easy to kind of understand. All right, please.
Yeah, can you just go back one slide? I just wanted to make one comment for folks.
Yeah.
It's certainly, I think, when entrepreneurs think of cannabis opportunities, mentally you don't go to the cost structure first. I think you go to revenues. I think you go to marketing strategies, branding strategies, big concepts, but maybe thinking about costs is a little less sexy, or considered a little less sexy, but man, is that important. Man, is that important in an industry where is increasingly competitive, where taxation is punitive. Looking at the cost and really laser focusing on the cost and getting innovative, becoming innovative with the way you can save on costs really makes or breaks businesses. So I appreciate your focus on this. And I know when Peter speaks a little later, he's going to be talking about some of the tax implications of spending decisions. So it's gonna fit really nicely.
Yeah, no, great comment. Honestly, I would, the revenue section of the BMC, I would do that last. In fact, revenues should be the answer to costs. Costs are your costs to provide value to your customers. And unfortunately, I think that's really how things should be designed. You shouldn't just, without logic, put costs on products that you're selling. Okay, so I'm just going to go over, and really, if you've noticed, I'm really just blasting everyone with a bunch of definitions of terms, but I think it's good because I really want everyone to be able to think about the different aspects or financial aspects of any business and how it is going to relate to yours, especially in this cannabis market. So one type of revenue stream, transaction-based, right? This is the pretty easy one. So this is your proceeds from sales of goods, usually one-time customer payments. Though I'm sure there's room for subscriptions. I'm sure we could figure that out. But pretty easy one to understand. Service revenue. So maybe as a grower or a retail store, you also provide services to folks. Oops, there we go. And so this might be an hourly sort of thing or a contractual revenue for your company. Project revenue. This might be a little bit deeper than a service thing. Maybe you are actually working to help someone start their own company, or to set up their growing facility or anything. And so this really should be based on the scope of work, hours. I will say for anyone that is looking at doing project type revenue, really let someone look at your contracts that you're making with people. Make sure your customers understand that they cannot ask for things outside the border of that contract. I've just worked with too many startups that they make the contract to do whatever service with the company, and everything's going great until the customer starts asking for hours and hours and hours and hours of more work, which are really outside of what they agreed on, and now you start losing money. So just something to kind of look out for there. And then recurring revenue. So ongoing payments that your company is going to always get. This is really one of my really more favorite topics, I guess, to talk about. One thing I always encourage the startups I work with to try to create is something I like to refer to as an engine. An engine makes your company money even when you are sleeping. So if you have a subscription fee, it's all digital. So you don't have to do anything. You're just getting that money, renting, leasing, lending things. Again, you could be sleeping, you're still going to get that money. So always try to think about that when you're creating your revenue model. Is there ways that we can make money even when we're not open? And I really like this graphic here. gosh, maybe it was Eric had mentioned it in our second session. But when folks are thinking about, let's say, growing for the cannabis market, you got to realize you're going to put all this money up at front. You're going to have the fixed and variable costs of growing. And it's going to take a matter of months before you actually get paid for all that money you just put out. And so it's really important if you can diversify your revenue streams. And that's why I like this graphic, because it kind of shows if you're trying to make a financial plan and, make sure you can pay people weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, you got to make sure money is coming in. And if you're, maybe doing a project revenue and your projects are only sending a check home every 2 months, well, then it's going to be very hard, at least at first, to make your employment checks. So it's just advisable to really diversify the ways your company can make money. And that's why I love branding, things like that, because if you can sell t-shirts out of your store or online or any of these other things that you can think of, maybe people are paying for whatever, lessons on how to grow or sell or something, you create this engine and your company will keep making money even when it's not spending it. And really, just to kind of close up that bit, there are a lot of costs in owning or running any business. And there are lots of ways to answer those costs. And so it's just really important if we consider these things and write them out. We have to put these things in our business model or our business plan. We have to have answers as to how are we going to make up that deficit of money that we just spent in order to provide that value to our customers that they're demanding. And if we don't actually answer these things, then we can't plan on them. We can't make sure we're safe when something happens in our environment that puts a stress on our business. And then most of all, we can't plan on improving it. So, again, if we don't see or recognize our expenses, our costs, if we don't plan on new revenue streams, then how are we ever going to improve those things and end up being more competitive? Or to quote the strategizer folks who invented the business model canvas, we will never be an invincible company. And that's what we want to make. Invincible companies, ones that innovate on their business models so that their competitors just don't have a chance. And with that, I'd like to give my little conclusion on the business model canvas. This is probably the saddest part for me, is that next Tuesday I won't continue talking about this. By far my favorite subject. I have so many 6-foot business model canvases to put on walls. It's crazy. But let's start with just a few hints. And again, you are able to download a digital version of the business model canvas if you go to the OG Accelerator website. So just 4 simple rules. It's actually it's kind of like that game Go, if you've ever seen that. Very, very simple rules, but they can be hard to master. Rule number 1, start with the building block you know best. If your company is built on key resources, then start making your model from there. I like to go with things because of course, as a startup, your goal is to make your business move from uncertain to certain. And so start with what you know and test everything. Rule number 2, use sticky notes. Sticky notes. That's right. This is why I love the business model canvas. I know, Peter, we're going to talk about the business plan later. But the business model, I get to use sticky notes, and you can even draw pictures on the sticky notes. But in truth, the philosophy behind that is a lot of work and decisions should bring you to a very simple conclusion. And so as you move through the business model canvas, it really should be very simple answers that are based on a lot of hard work. So using sticky notes allows us to remove what we thought and replace with what we know. And that's why we use sticky notes. So we don't actually ever write onto the BMC. Third one, all block entries relate to another. You'll see that, excuse me, on the next slide. Each customer has a very unique value proposition, and we really should map each customer out throughout the business model canvas for what relates to them, because what relates to one customer is never going to relate to all customers, and we need to understand that. And then lastly, be concise and avoid over detail. This is not my words, I might be paraphrasing, but even Alex would tell you, just drawing a stick figure on a Post-it note could actually tell you more than, making a paragraph to answer any of the segments. So really be concise, do not go into over detail. All right, this is it. This is the conclusion of my BMC. I love doing this one for people because it's just so neat. But I would like to show you now what the business model canvas looks like for Google search. So I'm gonna let that sink in for a second. Google search, it's that thing that we all can jump on and ask any question that we want and get answers to it totally for free. It's awesome, right? You've heard of it, I'm sure. So what is the value that Google search offers its customers, you and me? I can find anything on Google, right? Every time someone asks me for something, I'm usually, just Google it, you'll learn everything. So that's what it does. It offers the customers, the ability to find. Customers, users. I mean, I hate, this is, it totally breaks every rule of the BMC. It is so not concise. But for Google search, pretty much everybody is a customer of Google search. So we're just gonna say users for now. You can yell at me in the next cohort. How do people use Google search to find stuff? They just go to google.com. That's the channel. That's how the company is able to connect or technically offer their goods to the customer. And it's completely automated. Imagine if you had to talk to a human every time you did a Google search. Woo, talking about a bottleneck, it would be awful, right? No, it's completely automated, so it's very easy for anyone at any time to do this. And the best part, it's totally free. Can you imagine? You can search for anything totally free. Now, in order for Google to do that, they have to constantly develop software. They have to constantly develop their networks. Through that arduous and expensive process, they're actually creating a ginormous IT infrastructure and incredible amounts of intellectual property. And they do actually have a partner to help. This telecom pipeline that actually allows Google to be anywhere in the world. So they do have to work with at least one entity. However, the bad news to Google is it comes at an incredible cost for IT, for bandwidth. It's enormous. These people are paying, or this company is paying ginormous money in order to do all this. So why on earth does this make sense as a business model? They're giving it away for free. So we're going to take a second look at this business model to see what is going on with Google. Well, it turns out Google search has a second customer segment, and it's advertisers. Now, advertisers are very interested in having an audience that they can sell their products to, right? That's what they do. That's what they're made for. And guess what? Google search has an enormous, probably in the billions, amount of users. So you can start to see where I'm going here. Advertisers reach that audience through Google AdWords. I mean, literally reaching billions of people through Google AdWords. And there's a reason that Google is so wealthy, it's because they actually auction off words. So, for instance, if I had endless amounts of cash, I could potentially buy the word OG Accelerator. And anytime someone searched that, bam, that would come up. I could never afford to do it, nor would I. But that is how Google search makes its money. And what's even better, it's all automated. So again, Google search can make millions and millions of dollars from advertisers and scale it endlessly because they chose an automated process to reach their customers, to accept the money, to allow advertisers to sell to their audience. And that is why they do so well. So I believe I ended just in time there. So with that, I am going to invite us all to a 5-minute little session break. And then we will return after that, and we'll have some questions at the end. So if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A button. And then I will see everyone at 6:26.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. And Eric, thank you for that great overview of the business model Canvas. I really enjoyed how you brought it all together with the Google search example. And I think that is just a good framework for entrepreneurs looking to start their own dispensaries or processing facilities or craft grows or whatever it may be. So let's get started with the cannabis component of tonight's session, and I am so super excited for the three amazing speakers that we have today. Dr. Kyle Kingsley will join us in a couple moments, and it is amazing to have somebody of his caliber speak to us tonight. We are also joined by Peter Prevost from Bridgewest Consulting and Gene Sullivan from ArcView Ventures, and of course, Dr. Kingsley will be joining us as well as our special guest. For those who are joining for the first time this evening, I've had the honor of working for two companies, one for Fiorello Pharmaceuticals, which was later purchased by GTI, and most recently with Vireo Health. And really at Vireo had an opportunity to work throughout the cannabis supply chain, managing a tremendously talented group of employees, got to work on launching the New York Medical Cannabis Industry Association, and in my previous life was a public servant during the Bloomberg administration. I served as deputy comptroller and beforehand worked in financial services. And I think this has kind of been a reoccurring theme of our guests when we spoke last week to our friends from Curaleaf, or in previous weeks to our friends from Columbia Care and PharmaCann. People have different backgrounds coming into the cannabis industry. And it really doesn't matter what your specific background is, but I think it's more important to figure out how can you leverage the background? How can you leverage that background for your entrepreneurial venture here in cannabis? It has been really unbelievable the way public opinion has transformed over the past generation. If you look at the 70s here, we're talking about 10, 12% of Americans supporting legalization, to today, over 2/3 supporting legalization. And when it comes to the medicinal use of cannabis, when you poll Americans and you ask them, do you think a physician should be able to recommend medical cannabis to their patients, 90% and above say yes. So this is no longer a controversial issue. This is a mainstream issue which most Americans support. And when you reflect on the fact of how divided this country is on so many different topics, best demonstrated by the US Senate of literally being split down the middle 50-50, and the vice president occasionally being the decisive vote there. it is really amazing to see the progress that cannabis has made. And this comes from Rolling Stone's magazine, The United States of Weed, a great article, but I really appreciated this graphic. And when you take a close look at this graphic and you look at the dark green territories, and this is our home state of New York, and you see the Western cluster here, 18 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized adult recreational use of cannabis. The lighter greens are the medicinal, and the leftover oranges are really in a minority now, are states without programs. And some of them, in fact, are working on programs as we speak. So the majority of Americans today live in states with legal cannabis programs, at least on the state level. It's really exciting to think about the economic opportunities that this really transformation in public opinion and policies and regulations offers. But it's also important not to lose sight of the fact that there have been huge racial disparities when it comes to the war on drugs. And we've spoken about this before, but just again, you know, there's a 10x increased likelihood that a Black or Hispanic compared to a white of being arrested in New York. And over a 20-year period or so, nearly 1 million Black and Hispanic New Yorkers were arrested for marijuana offenses. And this comes from the New York Civil Liberties Union. And today, there are only 10 cannabis companies in New York, but none of them are minority owned. And I think that is something that's clearly going to change. I know there's a lot of folks who hope to qualify as social and economic equity entrepreneurs who are part of this Zoom webinar. The state has set a very ambitious goal of 50% of new licensees being offered to social and economic equity businesses. So it is true that there's a lack of diversity in the industry now, but it's also true that that is about to change. And there'll be a lot of opportunities for social equity applicants, for minority and women-owned businesses. Again, the objective of the cannabis curriculum is to become more conversant in adult use regulations and business opportunities throughout the supply chain. So at the end of this, and you know, as part of your applications to participate in the accelerator, a lot of you, when asked, you know, what license are you most interested in, you picked a few. And you may have, you know, said cultivation, processing, dispensary, and home delivery. My hope is that going through these sessions, meeting with people from different companies, getting insight into different parts of the supply chain, by the time we're done this evening, and if you've been through the 4 sessions, you've reviewed the resources, that you'll have a little more focus of what you're most interested in. So, you know, again, if you've missed any session, you can find it on YouTube. We started out with law and policy. We had folks from PharmaCann and Columbia Care, cultivation and processing. We had a special speaker, New York State Senator Jeremy Cooney, who gave us an amazing presentation. We had Eric Greenbaum, who also works with Dr. Kingsley at Goodness Growth Holdings, who took us through the scientific aspects and kind of the operational aspects of the cultivation and processing parts in the supply chain. Last week, we had 2 guests from Curaleaf, senior vice presidents of retail and marketing, and that was terrific. And tonight, of course, we have Peter Prevost, who will talk about business plans. We have Gene Sullivan, who will talk about raising capital, and we have our special guest, Dr. Kingsley. This is the last session, and I just really want to say a special thank you to all of our supporters. Of course, Binghamton University and the Kauffman Incubator, but also kind of this family of supporters, people who have contributed their expertise and also helped promote this event on social media. Really helpful, and we're deeply appreciative to all our supporters of the program. Tonight, after we conclude the program, you're going to get a survey request, and it's really important to us that we get your feedback. This is the first time we're doing a Cannabis Accelerator program, and in order to offer, let's say, more advanced programs, and also to offer programs like this to other entrepreneurs who may not have heard about it or didn't have an opportunity to participate, your feedback is golden. So it should take you no more than 5 minutes. It'd be great if you can fill it out tonight, if you can fill it out tomorrow morning. We really are eager to get your feedback. So that's really important to us. So that was the overview of the cannabis curriculum. And it is in a moment, I'm going to introduce Dr. Kyle Kingsley, who's the CEO and chairman of Goodness Growth Holdings. For purposes of full transparency, I've had the pleasure of working for Dr. Kingsley for many years at Vireo Health, and it is a real honor and privilege to have Dr. Kingsley join us this evening. His background is so impressive. He is a board certified physician, a serial entrepreneur and inventor. He took then Vireo Health public in 2019 and really built an amazing, what we call in the industry, MSO, multi-state operator, with businesses, cannabis businesses in Minnesota, New York, Arizona, and many other states. He's an author. He has degrees in science and medicine, and he also speaks German fluently, although I'm going to request that he stick to English this evening. But Dr. Kingsley, it is a pleasure to have you. You know, before we get started, let me ask you, how does a doctor in the ER in Minnesota decide that he wants to make a huge career change and get into the cannabis industry, really before it was hot, before people were even, you know, thinking about it, before there were public companies? How did you decide to go from the ER to the cannabis industry?
Hey, Ari, appreciate the kind words. Definitely was not a path that I had foreseen when I entered medical school all those years ago, but really, truly an organic path for me. I worked nights in the emergency department. I trained at Hennepin County Medical Center in downtown Minneapolis, and I ended up practicing in a suburban emergency room. And I saw a gentleman who was shot in the back during one of the Gulf Wars, and he was many years out from the injury, but had really horrendous pain in his back, horrible muscle spasm. You know, as an ER doc, you learn to gauge pretty quickly sort of the degree of pain that people are in. And this guy was just objectively miserable. And, you know, after I'd given him, you know, a dose of opioids that would kill you or I via his IV, we got to chatting, and, you know, he had developed pretty significant tolerance to opioids due to his need for pain relief over the preceding years. And we got to chatting. It was probably 3 a.m. And he told me, Doc, when I was in California, you know, I just smoked a little bit of cannabis. I was on no opioids and I had very little pain. You know, in Minnesota, he refused to smoke cannabis because it was illegal. And it was the first time as a physician that I looked at cannabis as actually a therapeutic agent instead of just a recreational substance that I really didn't care about. You know, interestingly, when you get the urine screens on patients, it wasn't lost on me that you just sort of ignored cannabis because it didn't contribute in a meaningful way to the clinical picture. And so I put 2 and 2 together, you know, very little downside. You saw very few side effects from cannabis, and this potential, you know, very interesting application for severe chronic intractable pain. And that really opened my eyes. And interestingly, Minnesota came up with a very medically focused, constrained law in short order. You know, literally it was a few months after I'd seen that patient, and it kind of all came together. I knew the right people. We opted to apply in a very scientific, professional way for one of 2 licenses in Minnesota, and we're fortunate to be selected as one of the 2 operators here in the state. That was all the way back in 2014. So this really has been my life now for about 7 years, and you know, no regrets. It's been amazing to see some of these stories. Patients who have decades of use of opioids, escalating doses. You know, the inevitable endpoint with opioids and tolerance is that you turn off your breathing and you end up in a very bad place. And to see people with these decades-long track records of opioid use being able to dramatically reduce that in some circumstances or eliminate it altogether for cannabis-based medicine has been unbelievably gratifying. Certainly one of the most gratifying things of my professional career.
Wow. Wow. No, it's a very moving story. In fact, I don't know if you guys get Hulu at home, but I'm watching a show called Dope Sick, and it kind of describes Purdue Pharma and OxyContin, and the FDA's involvement with labeling and all sorts of things throughout the years. And it's a made for Hollywood series, but it's a good made for Hollywood series. And to see the toll that opioids has taken on patients, and in fact in the show it describes a doctor himself who became addicted through an injury that he had. It's just a very emotional thing watching that. um, you know how do you feel as a physician that the FDA has no problem with opioids, but cannabis, notwithstanding, everything we just said, and it's in 37 states, it's still federally illegal. How does that even make sense?
Yeah, there's no rational basis, medical, scientific, social science wise. There's absolutely no justification for our treatment of cannabis. As you all know, it's an accident of history. There's some racism mixed in with some very greedy business folks many years ago that kind of led us to this path. But there's no rational basis for it, Ari. It has to change, and I think it inevitably will. Just a matter of timing.
I see, Dr. Kingsley, I see you're wearing a 1937 hat.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
Yeah, so a big reason for where we are with cannabis was this law, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which passed, which effectively made cannabis illegal throughout the United States. Now, interestingly, before that date, back in the 20s and before, a tincture of cannabis was a very common medicine used. It was part of the pharmacopoeia that many physicians would prescribe this for migraines, menstrual cramps, etc. It was fairly common practice. And of course, hemp was completely legal and used in many industrial applications back before 1937. Hemp also got looped in into this madness, and it's really persisted for almost 100 years, which is just mind-blowing.
Wow. Wow. Really, really unbelievable. So you shared your personal journey with us. You're in the ER in Minneapolis. You're on the front lines of the opioid epidemic, and you decide that you're going to apply for a cannabis license in Minnesota. And Minnesota has this kind of Uber medical program, which is a great fit for your perspective. How do you raise money? You're an ER doc. What did that seed round look like? And what did your friends and family think of the fact that, Dr. Kyle Kingsley is now going into the cannabis industry?
Yeah, great question. I was recently out of residency, and definitely didn't run in financially enabled circles. And very quickly, I realized that I would need to bring on some investors to raise some funds. And so I really just turned back to my hometown. I'm from a small farming community in southeastern Minnesota, Harmony, Minnesota, about 1,000 people. And I asked my dad, can you get the quote unquote rich guys together, and let's see if we can put some funds together for the operation. And he had 7 people around the fire. This was back July or June of 2014. Wow. Including farmers. I think a few teachers were there. Veterinarian was there. And I pitched them. I wish I had a recording of the pitch. I didn't know a lot, but I really did just kind of take the professional medical angle and convince these folks. My dad was mayor of the town, so that there was some value to the name. And I credit my dad a lot for the success we had in that initial fundraising. But we were able to successfully raise from friends and family, and that sort of extended out over the next 3 rounds. And really enabled us to get our feet underneath us. We were grossly undercapitalized for the bulk of our early history. And my recommendation is, ideally you self-fund if you can. If grants are available, do that. But if you need to pull in investors, be generous. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is, we were very humble in our valuation early, and we've done very well for a lot of our investors throughout our history. So very proud of that. But a little bit of humility early on in the fundraising process is going to pay dividends long term.
Excellent. That's very sound advice, and certainly turning to people who trust you and who you have a relationship with is something that I think resonates with a lot of our participants. So let's let's jump to New York, to the current market. You're really an expert in state-based markets throughout the country. What is your perspective on the New York opportunity, and not only for public companies, but also for newer entrepreneurs like those on the call for us today on this as part of the accelerator? What is the New York market going to look like, and is there reason to be really excited about the New York opportunity?
Yeah, Ari, just being completely transparent, I'm very bullish, very optimistic about the New York market, and especially for folks that are looking to enter the space. There's just going to be nearly limitless opportunity. I, like most people, am very anxious for things to get moving. There's people in New York are ready for a legitimate program here, and it's high time that this happen. But I'm very optimistic for folks that are smaller operators. We're going to have a little bit of scale that we bring to bear, but we have a lot of interest in partnering very early with new folks entering the space. Wholesale partnerships with retail. We have a home delivery apparatus. We're interested in partnering with folks that are growing their own, producing their own cannabis. There's really a lot of opportunities for partnership. And one of the things that New York did right is it's sort of a blending of new folks entering the space at a little bit smaller scale with folks that have a little bit more scale on the established side. So I'm very excited, very optimistic. But I'd say I'm most optimistic for the new folks entering the space. This really represents an unprecedented opportunity, particularly in the realm of social equity licensing. They've been very clear that that's a major priority. No state to date has done that well. And so we're very excited for that to come to pass.
Excellent, excellent. And I understand that your company has done a lot to bring new people into the industry in terms of internships, in terms of special programs. Is there anything you want to mention tonight about that?
Yeah, we're going to keep expanding on this over the coming quarters for certain. But I anticipate we will have more things to announce in the pipeline here in New York in the next few quarters, certainly pre-adult use. So we're definitely looking to work for people. Is there anything specifically you had in mind there, Ari?
University partnerships, internship programs.
Yeah, boy, we have sort of a pretty expansive list of partnerships that we're currently working on, both clinical research and internships. Mm-hmm. So happy to get you guys that information if you want to post that here.
Great. No, really appreciate that. And in the future, will your company supply third-party dispensaries? In other words, can you buy 1937 products in the future in an adult use market? If I'm a social equity entrepreneur launching my own dispensary and want to carry 1937 products, is there opportunity to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. As you may or may not know, we are limited to 8 dispensaries. And so we're going to have substantial supply, and we're looking to partner with, I have a strong preference to partner with smaller, newer operators early in the game. That's really compelling.
Excellent. Excellent. Last but not least question for you, Dr. Kingsley. Some of the participants I've been speaking to of the accelerator have asked me, is it too late to get into the cannabis industry? It's been going on for a couple of years, maybe not so much in New York, but in other states. Is it too late? What's your advice for entrepreneurs who are really passionate about cannabis, passionate about this opportunity? Is it too late, or is something they should really consider?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I don't think it's too late, with a caveat or two. I do think it's important that people understand that this is not a guaranteed path to financial success. You need to be very thoughtful in your business plan. Ideally, if you're going to be on the grow processing side, you need some secret sauce. You need optimal genetics. You need to be an amazing cultivator if you're going to compete in a much more competitive market. So absolutely, it's not too late, but it's also, I think, misguided to plow in naively without something that's a little bit differentiating. That could just be a little bit tougher path for folks. So. But definitely not too late, especially in a place like New York. I strongly encourage folks to participate. It's going to be a great market.
And can I give you one question from our participants?
Oh, please, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Len who's basically says there's a lot of upfront costs, it seems to him, in launching a grow operation, what is the expectation of investors in terms of becoming cash flow positive with all of these high upfront fixed costs? How quickly is somebody expected to become profitable?
A very interesting question. If you look at the major players in the space today, free cash flow is a pretty dramatic exception, and so that's really going to depend on your scale, the market that you're in. I think if you're the fastest ROI for folks is probably going to be growing very high quality indoor cultivation at smaller scale is probably going to be your quickest path to cash flow positive in a place like New York, I would predict. But as far as expectations, that's really, it's dependent on the business, depends on the market, and depends on the investors. I would definitely, in the case of cannabis, under promise on the timing to free cash flow. That's often slower than anticipated. Now in New York, it's interesting, you do have a significant capital expenditures early, but we're looking at a very robust market, probably the second most robust market in the United States, very, very early on. So if you can time it right, be humble in your costs, minimize OpEx, you could be in a pretty good spot early because you're probably going to be able to sell through everything that you make if it's of quality early in the program. So it's a very interesting question. We have not obtained yet free cash flow, and I'm now 6 years into selling cannabis. So it really does matter. It's dependent on scale, depending on the market, depending on your specific strategy and niche in the space.
Excellent. And one last question. We have a question from Jason who wants to know, given your medical background, when do you believe the FDA will allow medical cannabis to be sold in pharmacies?
Yeah, that really is a matter of federal change. The FDA just sort of has to follow the law of the land, which is the big hindrance right now. So the fact that medical cannabis is not legal and regulated at the federal level in the United States just makes absolutely no sense. So as soon as federal change happens, the FDA will follow suit very quickly. I challenge anybody here to find something else that polls at 90% plus approval. That's pretty unusual, and just the fact that the federal government has not been able to move in a meaningful way really speaks volumes to our dysfunction. So I sometime between 1 and 7 years would be my answer, depending on the federal change there.
So is that your prediction, Dr. Kingsley, 1 to 7 years?
Actually, I'm going to say sometime between 1 month and 7 years, just to include the current stuff that's going on.
Dr. Kingsley, it was an absolute pleasure to host you this evening, and I really appreciate your time and everything you've been doing and that your company's been doing for the social equity applicants and for the cannabis industry throughout the United States for your advocacy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you all.
Take care. A real pleasure. Okay, Eric, so I want to move on to introducing Peter now, but I'm going to stop my share and let you take charge of the presentation so I can also handle the Q&A. But that was really a great presentation from Dr. Kingsley. I'm so glad he was able to join us.
Awesome to get that kind of information. Huge. Love it. Can you see this okay? Am I good?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. Well, our second guest this evening is a good friend and partner of mine. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. It is really amazing to have you here. You have an impressive background. You are a licensed CPA and internal auditor. You have worked for some of the largest names in the financial services industry, with TD Ameritrade, with Ernst & Young, with Turner Industries, and you've been in the cannabis industry for several years now. You also have 2 degrees from LSU. I'm sure we have some LSU fans who are participating in the Accelerator. But thank you so much, Peter, for making time to join us this evening. But let me ask you, what is a nice guy like you with all these fancy degrees and certifications doing in the cannabis industry?
That's a great question, Ari, and definitely want to thank you and Eric for having me on. Very excited to see what happens in New York. Obviously, a market that a lot of us have been watching for a long time. So yeah, how did I end up here? I think it's really a byproduct of my financial background. CPAs and others with financial expertise have been in high demand in this industry since the very beginning. And that really afforded, the major firms like Ernst & Young, the company I used to work for, all these large groups have stayed on the sidelines. And so if you're an entrepreneurial CPA or investment advisor or transactional focused attorney, you had a really great opportunity in front of you that the big guys were not competing over. And so that's really one of the things that attracted me and pulled me in. I was lucky enough to meet our company's founder back in 2013. I should use the word meet lightly because I tracked him down and stalked him at several NCIA meetings until we became friends. And, it was just kind of scanning the environment, Ari, and seeing that opportunity. And then I guess just deep down having that passion about me and wanting to be involved in this societal change. I grew up somewhere in Louisiana that had some of the most restrictive cannabis laws in America, also one of the highest prison populations in America, and so you don't have to be a genius to connect the dots on that and kind of see what a different future might look like. And so just really excited to be involved. And the past 7 years have truly been something that I could not have anticipated.
Well, I've always enjoyed not only working with you, but also working with CPAs with an expertise in cannabis accounting, because you guys see the P&L, you see the financial statements of literally dozens, if not hundreds of companies. And I think the insights you can glean from that type of information is just really powerful. So really looking forward to your presentation. Let's jump into it.
Absolutely. So this slide, really what I am trying to show you here, really what's been happening up until this point, right? What are the different mechanisms that entrepreneurs have used to fund these ventures? And some of this will be repetitive from Dr. Kingsley's presentation. He mentioned self-funding, friends and family, partners. These are all, you have to think of this list as not being linear, right? These things can all be happening in conjunction with one another. And so, with the large banks and the SBA and all these groups that would traditionally fund small business being on the sidelines, entrepreneurs in cannabis have had to get creative, right? And you've had to figure out ways to bootstrap, you've had to figure out ways to partner with people in order to achieve the specific goals. So the reason I wanted to start with this slide was really to highlight the importance of when you're writing a business plan, you need to know your audience, right? What you present to your friends and family may be very different than if you're going to a Canada-specific venture capital firm like ArcView that we're going to hear from later. And so knowing your audience and tailoring the presentation to meet that audience and to really anticipate their questions is a big deal. And it's something that you should put some extra time into. And then maybe you have multiple versions of your plan for different audiences. And something I want to highlight on the list that we've talked about a bit here today is the state-based social equity initiatives, right? I mean, we're seeing more and more that this is a part of an adult use program. As was alluded to earlier, we don't feel like any state has truly gotten it right, but that's how cannabis policy goes, right? Each state learns from the mistakes of the state before it in hopes that we do it better next time, right? And New York, much like the example I'll use from Oakland, California, where they also allocated, I think, about 50% of their business permits to social equity applicants. They took it a step further and set aside about $3.5 to $4 million in interest-free small business loans to go to those same entrepreneurs. And I think it's that type of action that we need to see on the state level that'll really help level the playing field. Let's just be realistic about it. I mean, a startup entrepreneur from a limited resource background likely does not have access to a VC. They likely don't know, they don't have the documents that a capital broker or an alternative lender would need, especially if you're pre-revenue, right? Especially when you're pre-revenue, it's the hardest to raise funds. You don't have a permit, you've got an idea. And so just kind of want to start start the presentation by sharing this list to point out that these are some of the typical avenues that'll be available to you as an entrepreneur in the cannabis space. and definitely want to tailor your pitch to each of these different groups. And almost as you move through the process, you kind of are moving through the different groups. Like hopefully you can get through the application phase self-funded, right? Because if you've done that, you've got your permit, it's much easier to raise money from potential partners, even friends and family at that point, once you're able to show that you've had that success in the permitting process. Once you're up and running and you've got some operational history, well, then you can move on to the VCs, the cannabis specific investment groups like ArcView. At that point, maybe you have access to capital brokers and you can put your story in front of them, and looking at some different types of receivables factoring or other alternative lenders, looking at equipment loans. These are all things that once you're operational, you can start to explore. And so this slide also really wanted to kind of prime up the checklist, which is the next slide that I'm going to spend most of my time on. But really, this is some marijuana MJ Biz daily survey data from individuals who identified themselves as cannabis investors, right? And just wanted to kind of share the results of this. And I'm really going to focus in on the top 4 because I think those are the most important. So you see it lists an inadequate or incomplete business plan, limited experience or education in the team, financial projections that are maybe not the most realistic, which I think grandiose statements kind of falls into that vein. So just wanted to illustrate that there is some kind of survey data out there. We're seeing what investors are thinking, getting a little bit of insight into their mindset, and just really thinking about the fundamentals of a business plan and the financial model that needs to go with it. And the fact that above all, it needs to be complete and it needs to be reasonable, and you need to be able to substantiate the numbers that you're using.
I just want to jump in here, Peter. This is really helpful. And we have a great question for Damon, which is, what do potential investors or financial lenders prefer? Do they prefer the business model canvas or a business plan? What would you advise? I'm wondering what you would say to that.
I would advise that there's definitely no right or wrong answer there. And I think as I've learned more about the canvas from Eric, I mean, it seems like these things can really be used in tandem, and that your canvas is really a runway to developing your own thoughts and developing your own plans internally, right? And so I don't think there's a right or wrong approach. I think it really needs to be presented properly. You need to make sure that you can answer all the questions, whether you've got it in a 50-page detailed plan or a beautiful visual. The key thing is, are you able to effectively communicate your vision and communicate the risk associated with the vision to the person who is going to be evaluating you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And Eric and I actually had an interesting conversation about this before we got started this evening when we were doing our tech checks. And I think where we landed, and Eric, you can jump in if you think otherwise, which is business model canvas is a great place to start. It's a great place to shape, reshape, and refine ideas. And once it's there, and once you have it, and once you've gone through that exercise, it's going to be a lot easier to write your business plan. And notwithstanding any personal feelings that people have about business plans, not being the best way to spend one's time, it still seems to be the expectation. If you're trying to raise money for a new processing facility and you're trying to raise $2 million, your investors are going to expect a business plan. So it's certainly good to have one.
I'll tell you one thing that I've picked up on through going through these sessions is I really love, and Eric really kind of hammered this home earlier when he's talking about the sticky notes, right? So as someone who's done a lot of financial models and written a lot of business plans, well, the one rule I could say is that it's going to change numerous times, right? And so that canvas exercise and having that fluid ability to really map out your own thoughts and to talk through those thoughts with other people and to go through your pitch in a very high level, right? Like, that's invaluable. And it probably not, I mean, I haven't done it that way, but it's hard for me to not envision it saving a lot of time, right? By using that progression and really thinking through some of the obstacles and mistakes early on, using that visual exercise. I think it's great. And it's actually, after hearing these sessions, something I want to try to incorporate more.
Thank you.
This will really be where I spend the meat of my presentation. And, the goal here for me today was really to have people walk away with what I would call a foundational planning checklist, right? Some items that, while, it's hard to say if one ingredient is the real secret sauce, I personally think that these three foundational elements, or the things that, whether you're talking to a municipality seeking approval, talking to a potential partner, potential investor, these are all the foundational elements that will not change from those conversations. And I think these are also super pertinent in New York today, because we all know that we don't have regulations yet. We don't know the exact playbook. We don't know the details, which are, going to be numerous and very important, have not all been disclosed to us yet. So these are three things that you can predict with pretty reasonable accuracy. And these are things that you really, in my opinion, can't spend too much time on. And so I will kind of dive through each of these checklist items and talk about some of these big picture foundational items. And please feel free to stop with any questions along the way. So, going through the team and essential roles, right? And I'll spend some time talking about all of these areas, but I think one great starting point, right, is, it's going to be vastly different for cultivation versus processing versus retail. The experience that you need on the team is going to be different. Expertise is going to be different, but either way, that you need a group of people to push this thing forward. And if you're going to a potential investor or partner, and you've got a slim team with no real path to expand said team, then you're going to look like you're maybe at a disadvantage to someone who doesn't have these things, right? Another reason to start building the team out as soon as possible is that we have to recognize that there is a finite number of talent, the talent pool in this industry, right? I mean, there's not as many people with cultivation experience as maybe there are with different retail experiences, right? So if you wait too long to try and start building out your team and forging these partnerships, a lot of the good talent will have already found a home, or they will have started their own venture. And so I think starting this process early and using it as a part of your foundational planning can really put you into the best position possible. A bit of a paradigm shift that we're seeing now, especially in the licensing space, is that early on in the cannabis industry, there were massive amounts of points for having industry experience. Well, we're now starting to see that replaced with points for people that are actually from the city or from the town or from the state. New Jersey, great example of this, right? Where, if you want to apply for a certain category of permit, you have to live in a specific county or an adjacent county, right? And so the large MSOs are going to be seeking local partnerships, as Dr. Kingsley alluded to earlier, and then opportunities for businesses from maybe different verticals within the industry to start collaborating earlier. And so, I think the localized nature of this industry represents a real opportunity for, not to be too for the homegrown entrepreneur, right? Like that opportunity maybe hasn't been on the table in some of these earlier rounds of medical licensing. And I think today that's our chance to to change that and to rewrite the part of the history book where it's only large companies participating in this. Another kind of piece of the team component would be identifying key managers or key consultants. Ideally, if you're in cultivation space and you have a cultivation manager already identified, ideally, if you want to make beverages and you've got that beverage manager already identified. If you're not able to find those people, then my advice would be to engage someone who knows. Find that cultivation consultant, find a manufacturing consultant, and start developing that expertise internally, right? Because if you can't hire it, if you can't partner with it, then you have to have some mechanism for that knowledge transfer to occur. And there's a lot of great groups out there that will work with you through every step of the process. And I think it's important for people to start that journey early, because I mean, the one thing you will learn is that this industry moves at a very rapid pace and changes very quickly. So likely, if you're reading an article from even a year ago, but it's definitely 2 to 3 years ago, it's going to be dated at this point. So we're learning more and more every year, and the methods are changing. While you're doing all the team building exercises, the local partnerships, very much important to keep the state specific requirements in mind. There may be something specific about a level of experience, whether it be a medical director, or if you're looking at different research components. Just important always to keep the state specific requirements in mind. Obviously in New York, we don't know those yet. So it'll be important to be monitoring that and, changing your plan to the extent that you can. Diversity is something that we've talked about quite a bit here tonight, and it's another opportunity. Much like seeing the localized movement take shape in different markets, we're seeing diversity now be a real piece of the puzzle. And it's another opportunity for groups that are not involved yet today to get involved. And potentially 50% of the permits going to social equity entrepreneurs. That's a huge opportunity. And this has become one of the most widely discussed topics in the industry, and rightfully so. I mean, we go back and look at the data that Ari presented earlier, 10 times more likely to get arrested, nearly 1 million people in jail, yet 0 diversely owned businesses in the state. So another massive opportunity to not only write the history books, but also for entrepreneurs who are savvy enough to build these things into their plans from day one, because this is what the regulators want to see. And so that in turns means that's what the investors want to see, right? Those two things don't operate in vacuums. Nextly, I'll spend a little time talking about real estate. Obviously a super critical component to any business. If you're in cultivation, it seems like cultivation or manufacturing, it seems like the light industrial zones have been a hot spot in a number of states, and those tend to be a pretty safe bet for zoning considerations, right? On the retail side, you have a lot more to consider. Particularly the safe distance requirements. New York was very specific about this, thankfully. And so they said 500 feet away from a school, 200 feet away from a place of worship. And so, starting that real estate search early and keeping these two things in mind will put you in the best position possible. Although it's not required that you have real estate to release your business plan, it does put you in a much stronger position. Right? I mean, if you're able to go to that level of detail for your investor or your partner, I think it gives everyone a higher degree of comfortability in knowing that the likelihood of this business actually getting off the ground is there.
Certainly on the retail side, I think the zoning makes things a lot more challenging in New York City. And it's I love New York City. Every corner has a house of worship or a school. I mean, that's just the city. That's the city. So, I think when you're talking about more industrial areas for processing, for cultivation, there's a lot more flexibility, but it's certainly going to be challenging. I see we're running a little late. I want to make sure that we get to your tax insights, Peter. So
I can totally speed it up a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, the next 2 bullet points are really talking about or thinking through the lease versus buy decision. If you're going to have a landlord through a lease, then you just need to make sure everything is properly disclosed and that the landlord is giving you specific written approval to use for this purpose. The landlord will likely have to disclose to their mortgage holder. So just very important to make sure you're transparent with the landlord. Option agreements are a great tool if you're in the early planning phase. An option agreement could be used for a buy or for a lease situation, to where you're allowed to basically have first right of refusal on a property, and that way you're not paying rent throughout the entire process. And all of these things with the real estate discussion are really pointed at making sure the likelihood of the business succeeding is there, but also speed to market. We've seen that be rewarded time and again, that the early entrants in the legal cannabis industry typically have higher market share and they maintain that for longer. On the resource planning side, I've talked about the financial model quite a bit, but I'll kind of give some very brief, bullet points on what it needs to include. So key performance indicators, you absolutely want to make sure you have projected financial statements, profit and loss, balance sheet, cash flows, and being realistic about your revenue and expense targets, very important. You don't want to assume you're going to buy at Oklahoma prices and sell at Massachusetts prices. That would fall under the grandiose statement category that we kind of looked at earlier. Important to look at the market that you're in, how many licenses will be issued, how many square feet of canopy has been licensed for cultivation, what are the supply chain dynamics, are we using distribution companies, is it all vertically integrated, really taking a deep dive into understanding the market that you're in and what it might look like in the future. And on the regulatory side, I'll basically say that there's, regulatory changes are a huge part of the industry. We all know that. We see that regularly. At this stage in the game, almost practically in 2022. New York still has to issue regulations. We're looking at 2023 launch, right? So you have to start thinking about what the federal legalization is going to look like, and it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you have interstate commerce, which will put some states at an advantage, others in a disadvantage. It will likely lower the cost of flower and other products, but the 280E and the taxes go away, right? And so those two items together will completely change your financials. And so I think it's just important, when we're looking at a market that might not develop quickly, to have those regulatory buffers built in, or to at least make sure you understand what the impact would be. And I think that is a good segue to go to the tax situation next, while we're talking about the regulatory changes and the fact that 280E, which has been a huge burden on the industry for a number of years, very well may go away in the next several years. Well, that doesn't change what we have to do today. And so today, under IRS Code Section 280E, you as a retailer or producer or cultivator are only allowed to deduct your cost of goods sold. And this will hit the retailers much harder than anyone else, because they will by nature have more selling, general, and administrative expenses than a producer. Definitely something to take into account. And I have an illustrative example for a dispensary on the next slide, just to kind of show you what this can do if not properly accounted for. And so you can see both businesses have the same top line revenue of 1 million, cost of goods sold 650,000, resulting in gross income of 350. Then we have our selling, general, and administrative expenses, which in this particular case for a dispensary would include things like marketing, rent, staff. Really, I mean, a lot of your big ticket items outside of your inventory purchases will fall into that bucket. And so, both entities under this scenario would have about 150K in income. Well, under the 280E add back, you're going to have to add that 200,000 of business expense back in for your tax calculation. So as you can see, the shift in taxable income from 150 to 350 changes your tax bill from 60,000 to 140,000. In both cases, you have realistically generated the same amount of income. However, one entity is paying a 93% tax rate, the other is paying a 40% tax rate.
Peter, is that possible? Are there dispensaries out there that are paying an effective tax rate in the 90%, 90% and more?
It is. I have seen, and granted, this is not a common example, but I've seen the tax rate go over 100%. Whenever you had just overloaded on SG&A expenses, not properly segregating costs, frivolous spending. Yeah, I've seen it go over 100%. So
if a dispensary isn't monitoring this and doesn't really understand what 280E is spending money on marketing expenses and other things that you can't deduct, you can really run into a situation where you're not going to be able to make your tax payments.
100%. Yeah, and then at that point you could end up with liens. You could end up in there's a whole rabbit hole that ensues from there. So the good news is that once federally legalized, by all accounts, 280E should go away. But then we'll see some sort of new excise taxes, and we'll see some changes. But definitely has been a lot, especially on the retailers. The retailers truly bear the brunt of 280E.
Wow. Just one quick question for you, Peter, before we turn it over to Gene. If somebody wants to learn more about 280E, wants to participate in webinars, wants to read more about it, it is complicated. Any recommendations for them?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I would say that our company, Bridge West, we have a lot of resources out there. NCIA has put out some really good resources. I've seen Marijuana Policy Project write about this. So there is a lot out there in terms of education.
Excellent. And do you think this might change one day?
I mean, the general thought process is that once federally legalized, this provision, as soon as cannabis is no longer a Schedule 1, 280E would no longer apply. Now, what it gets replaced with, I think, is the $1 million question.
Or the $1 billion question.
Right, yeah.
Peter, thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. Really appreciate all of your time and sharing your expertise with us this evening. Great to have you. Thank you again, Peter. It is now my pleasure, albeit a little late, to introduce my good friend Gene Sullivan. Gene, it is such a pleasure to have you with us this evening. We have saved. Everyone has been amazing, so I don't want to insult anybody if I say we've saved the best for last. But you are the best of the best. So it is an absolute pleasure to have you. Welcome to the OG Cannabis Accelerator.
Thank you, Ari and Eric, for inviting me, and Peter, that was fabulous. Now, I love speaking to groups like this, but I know people get antsy if we run over time. But do I have people's, let's say, permission to go to maybe what, a quarter till at the latest?
Absolutely. We're a very flexible bunch, Gene. We've gone into OT before, and for you, we will go into OT. And if anybody has a professional commitment or a personal commitment that bars them from staying with us the entire time, they'll be able to watch this on YouTube a little bit later.
Okay.
So there is absolutely no rush. We're delighted to have you. Gene, how does such an impressive person like yourself, with so many degrees and a background in private equity and venture capital, how did you decide to get involved with the cannabis industry? And you did so early on.
Early on, but it's a wonderful story. Ari, do you believe in luck? I write about and think about luck a lot because, I figured out what luck is. Luck is being aware of what's going on around you and then seizing the moment, because you're knowledgeable, So I love sharing this story that in 2014, New York passed the Compassionate Care Act, bringing medical cannabis to our state. And my husband, John, joined your team. And I said, uh-oh, I better learn about this stuff, because I love telling on myself. I believed in the war on drugs. I didn't understand. And I gave my kids hell when they smoked in high school. I didn't like that. And so the first thing I did was read Steve D'Angelo's book. And I said, what? We still arrest more than 600,000 brown and black men and boys? And you heard today, 746,745 people we've arrested in our state over time. I couldn't believe it. But then, being a long-time investor, I said, this is the next big thing. And I will share with you so passionately that this is what I'm so proud and pleased to be in this business. It touches on so many notes. I'm sure that's the case for all of us. The social justice issues, the opportunity for wealth, wellness, learning things, technology. It's so fascinating to me, and I'm sure that's why all of us are so interested. So off to MJ Biz I went this past year. I did go this year to Vegas. It was my first business trip since COVID. A little wild to go to Newark Airport and see more people than I've ever seen in my life in the airport. And I went to MJ Biz back in the day. And Troy Dayton from ArcView found me and said, Gene, I need you. I need classically trained people, investors, to help me bring in deal flow and bring in investors. So I said, I'm yours. He put the net over my head. So I advise companies. ArcView never acted as a principal till now. We have a fund where we've made more than 15 investments. I love advising companies on how to connect, how to build a business. And then we have morphed ourselves into an online digital content. Here we have put on major events, 5 or 6 a year. And before COVID, I got to travel all over the world. I went to Israel on my first trip there, which was a thrill, and spoke at Canatech. That was the thrill of my life professionally, to meet Dr. Raphael Meshulam and Dedi Mary, the reigning chief scientist of Israel, where the seminal research is being done. I've learned so much over these past 8 years, and I am proud to share that and connect. It's been incredible.
Thank you.
So what I love to share is, it's such a smarmy title, but I'm trying to get you to laugh too, is 5 stupid things that entrepreneurs do over and over again. Now, you heard Peter set this up perfectly because many of those things I include, but I don't leave investors out too, because we do completely stupid things also. And if you're a business owner or entrepreneur seeking financing, you need to know the completely inane things that we do also. So go to the next slide and we'll run through some of these. Here's my background. You heard some of it. My best credential to tell you is I have seen 1,000 times 1,000 companies over my 30 years. Co-founder of a fund in New York City, a tech fund for many years. And then in 2014, I left that fund, and that's when I got into this wonderful cannabis industry. And I really care about women and will help a few good men. but I really, women need a lot of help. Guys just naturally, they call up their buddies and say, hey, I'm starting this business, will you fund me? And they say yes. Women don't have that kind of network. Not, certainly some do, but that's one thing I like to do is show how to connect and all. So let's go to some of those things. So first of all, I'm laughing at my own slides here. That's pretty bad. One of the number one things that business owners or early stage entrepreneurs do, and I know there's many of you on this discussion today, is you don't know how to raise money and you don't raise enough money. That's one of the big problems. People, both men and women, will say, okay, here's what I'm doing. I'm going to raise like $100,000. I said, well, how far do you think that's going to take you? And then once they get the actual meeting, well, that's another thing. Many don't have any idea how to get the meeting. Now, you heard Peter lay out, as well as Dr. Kyle, some of the sources of money. Now, here's something kind of controversial that I'll say. I actually don't believe in going to family, because guess what? You have to look at them at Thanksgiving as they press you on how your business is doing. But I do believe in going to friends and people that already know you, people you worked with, maybe your next door neighbor, although they could be at Thanksgiving dinner too. People who know you, I'm glad you're laughing, Eric. People who know you are the best people to go to for that early stage, let's say license pursuit money, because you don't have to tell them who you are or what you've accomplished. They already know that you're terrific, that you know how to make things happen. So maybe a former boss, a colleague, people just start thinking about that. And when I work with entrepreneurs on this subject, I make them write down everybody they know. And I think that's important. You start to think about, look through your contacts, think about all the people that you know and have worked with. That's where you go to get that first seed financing. You tell them their story. Okay, now you get the meeting, right? You called up your old boss who really promoted you, who appreciated you, who you worked with for 6 years. They know you're great. And you sit down. That's the next thing. What the heck do you say when you get the meeting? Okay, so you have to be very organized with a set of tools. One set of tools, I do not believe in sending out a deck to get the meeting. I believe in a short, maybe a couple paragraphs or a one-pager that says, here's what I'm looking for. Might I have a half hour of your time next Monday? I'm going to be in your neighborhood. Notice there's a few buzzwords in there, you're in the neighborhood. Oh, that you're in Washington, D.C., the neighborhood, right? That's where your old boss lives. I'm going to be in D.C. next Monday. Might I come by and have a half hour of your time? So now you get the meeting. And so go to the next slide. So now what the heck would you get to the point on what you're doing? That's another problem. I've just observed over time, people just can't even get it out their mouth. I will stop you 10 minutes in and I will say, I have no idea what you're selling or what you're building. Now, this is why it's so important. I am part of a institutional fund, but I have to go to my partners and tell them what you're doing to get their wallet out. So I have to be able to explain it. Now, here's the marker for not doing it right. You get so hung up on the feeds and speeds. That's if it's a technology platform, or telling me every detail about your brand and your I want to know that. I want to know more about the business of the business. Got that? The slide that most people leave out is what's your go-to-market plan? I want to see that. Who's your perfect customer? This is why I do believe in that business canvas. I've used that for years and years. Fabulous retailer we invested in. She's a New Yorker. She went to Massachusetts 4 years ago, has a fabulous dispensary in Great Barrington, which has many dispensaries now. But she's focused on women. She wants to give them the conversation. She wants to show them what do they need for pain, anxiety, sleep. Whereas you go to others in there, I've been in all of them. It's fabulous. 2 hours, 20 minutes from Manhattan. Check it out if you're thinking about a dispensary. You'll see the differences. Some you're just shoveled up to the window and you pick out what you want on a screen. I don't want that. I want the conversation. Okay, so now this is the next slide, which is worried about dilution instead of financing runway. It is critical to be able to understand the numbers, just like Peter was showing you. You need to understand your capital needs over time. And how do you do that? You're not born knowing that. You hire smart people who are finance professionals and put them at your side. There's plenty of temp CFOs. That's what you need to reach for if you yourself don't know how to build a proper P&L to understand your capital needs. I vouch for Bridge West. I've used them. I've recommended them. They're a fabulous firm. And I know a little secret, Peter, you didn't tell. I know you're doing business in New York State. So that's my promotion for you. But there are plenty of wonderful, smart people who can help you figure that out. It's critical to know the numbers, because guess what? Let's say you're raising maybe a round and I say, well, what's your aspirational valuation? And you give me a blank stare, guess what? You might have gotten this meeting, but you're not going to get the next meeting. You know why? I want you to know the numbers. I want you to be aware of your capital needs over time. I want you to understand the margin. And notice, I can't teach you all this right now, nor could Peter or Dr. Kyle or Ari, but the words we're using, all that is find outable. And I take full pride in that resource sheet that's there. There's wonderful, wonderful books. And if you're not reading Fred Wilson every day, a New York, one of the most successful VCs, he writes a blog every day, and he has something in the archives called MBA Mondays. You can learn from him and from another book that's there by my friend Brad Feld called Venture Deals. These conversations today are just to open the door so you can learn what's going on. All right, next slide. Also, this was mentioned, every MSO, multi-state operator, or license owner that I know, when they stand up and talk, they say the number one hardest asset to acquire are the right people on the team. It's hard to find dynamic people who are going to work like crazy, who care, who are going to do quality work. So that is important. And one thing I've learned over time, sometimes CEOs are afraid to hire people smarter than they are. That's ridiculous. Stephen Jobs says, hire the best possible people out there. Let them tell you what you need. You tell them, hey, in 30 days, come back to me, lay out your plan for the next year. Tell me what we're missing, what we should be doing. Hire slowly, fire fast. The person's not right, send them on their way. I always find a soft landing. Does this rate of slides mean I should speed it up there? So
no, we can go whatever pace you want, Jane.
My heart is racing, but I am trying to.
You're doing wonderful. We can go back if you like.
No, that's all right. So this is, I love this guy. So then another thing is that a big mistake is people have no idea how to follow up. So, you're going to get a lot of no's. Hey, this isn't for me. You're too early. You don't know what you're doing. I never liked you when you worked with me anyway. But you've got to follow up. And one great way to follow up is to actually send the investor an update. Hey, I got my first 50,000, and I've gotten my it's in Massachusetts called the host community agreement. Because we're now moving into adult legalization, and as you heard also, the regs are not out and they're not expected to be out until well into 2022. But you're going to have to get agreement from the municipality or the city or the town that you are going into. That happened back in the day with you, Ari, too. I remember that well. But so those are the kinds of things that you can tell an investor in an update. That's big. Maybe, you got your first step, your provisional license came your way. That's really big. So there's certain milestones that you can announce to a group of investors that changes the game. And then say, might I have a meeting with you for a half an hour and give you an update? That's how to get the wallet out of their pocket, by giving them good news. Maybe you just hired a dynamic person who's well experienced on running a retail operation. That's big news. So building that team, all those things go into what's happening. And then the next and most important thing is how to build, the esprit de corps on your team, how to really, lead the charge. Say, hey, follow me up the mountain, not there's the mountain. That kind of really high spirit that's needed, because it is hard to lead a company. It is lonely up there. Surround yourself with a board of advisors, your kitchen cabinet, join groups. There's lots of them out there. I really believe in incubators, where I see companies go in as a project and come out as a company. So all that's important. Now, let me pause there. Are there any specific questions? Because I want to just run through quickly the completely dumbass things that we as investors do. It's important you know what our problems are also.
So, Gene, that was amazing. We have a question from Darian, who wants to know what is the sweet spot for return on investments, and what length of time are venture capital firms looking for?
Oh, Darian, I'm going to have to slap your face. It just so happens I know Darian. And thank you for the question. It's a fair question. Look, M&A, a merger and acquisition activity, is higher than ever. And so, yes, do people want a liquidity event, meaning a sale or maybe a public offer? Those are happening now at more rapid pace. But it's kind of like tech. It has taken 5 to 7 years to get that M&A engine up and running. And it is true that investors want to return. So you don't want to tell an investor, oh, I'm just building a lifestyle business, I'm never going to sell it, because that's one of the only ways to get the return. Notice I caught myself, because if you have a very lucrative private company, you can give a dividend, you can disgorge net income to them. So there are other ways, but certainly investors want a return on investment. Typically, institutional investors getting 30% IRR is a great number. People will tell you more, but that's pretty normal. Sure, there's some outliers, and there's been some pretty amazing acquisition activity over time in this cannabis industry, because those MSOs have been wanting to acquire more and more licenses, like the Monopoly Board. So there's kind of a quick walk around the block on that. All right, let's go to some of the investor things, because this is really important to know. First of all, we as investors often throw money at deals we know nothing about. Now, I've been involved in some very interesting biopharma, biosynthetic deals, I had to understand and learn. It took me about 2 years to understand that. And we brought in scientists to help us understand what in the heck a lab produced cannabinoid was all about, how much the cost basis should be, what that might be sold for, who wants that. So there's an example, whereas if you're in strange territory, sure, you might, quote, get lucky, like I talked about luck earlier, but you also, can figure things out by bringing strong people to your side. The next thing we do is we way overpay on valuation. Valuation is certainly an art and a science. Valuations are all over the place, and it's important to pull people by your side. Now, a trick question an investor will say is, what's the valuation? The tricky part is you're not really supposed to answer that. Yes, it's true. You could say an aspirational number to kind of get them close. But if that number is way outrageous, they are going to tell you to see you later. So it's important to learn how to speak about valuation. Again, I can't teach you all those tricks right now, but these are the kinds of things you can find out by reading and talking to experienced people. There's plenty of us out there who are willing to help you and want to help you. I praise Ari and Eric for pulling this kind of incubator together, because that's how we can impart this knowledge and help each other. Okay, next is, this is one of the biggest lessons one has to learn as an investor. We might have a lot of ideas, but does that matter? What matters if she, the CEO, can think that way, because if she doesn't, it's not going to happen. You might see a certain acquisition. If she doesn't want it, it's not going to happen. It took me a long time to learn that. What is the strategy of the CEO and the team, not your strategy? Sure, maybe they're coachable. Maybe you've got a great strategy. Maybe they're listening, but maybe they're not. This is a big kind of nuanced area. Next, and just watch out for this, we love to create draconian terms that we believe will create success. For example, if you can make this much revenue within the next year, we'll change the valuation, make it higher. This is completely nuts. It puts you on the wrong side of the table with the entrepreneur, or we'll give you warrants if this happens. I had to learn those lessons early by writing those kind of silly, let's say, terms into a term sheet, and was taught by people a lot more experienced. Don't do that. And then the last thing, and I'm suffering from this right now in a deal that we're in, we keep throwing money at deals that aren't working. There's a line for that: feed your winners, starve your losers. It's hard. We become emotionally attached. But if there's certain milestones that the company should be making over time, and it's been plenty of time, you have to learn to cut your losses. There's been plenty of companies in both cannabis as well as non-cannabis that have pivoted. So try doing that by pulling around you smart people that can help you figure it out. Okay, that is kind of my walk around the block. I say this and I get myself in trouble. You are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am happy to answer any emails. I'm easy to find, and I put my email address, I believe, on that resource sheet. I'll put it in the chat. This gets me in trouble, but hey, if we don't help people, who will, right? So if I don't answer, it means I didn't see it. And as said, it's hard for me to meet with you, but it's not hard to answer emails. But I want to hear from you, and I will say this openly. We do have a wonderful early stage fund at ArcView. We're going to make at least 7 or 8 more investments. If you have a company that I should look at, I welcome you to write to me, send me an exec summary. I will look at your company. And I know everybody investing. If I think it's worthy, I'm happy to introduce you to others. So I hope I imparted some words of wisdom, and I'm just wishing you all the best. Look, I'm in awe of you that think of great cannabis companies to build and then go and build them. It's hard, but I'm just wishing you so much good energy in doing that. Back to you, Eric, Ari.
Gene, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your enthusiasm, your inspiration. It is truly appreciated. You've done so much over the years for entrepreneurs, mentoring them, entrepreneurs of all backgrounds, women and men, that it is deeply appreciated. It is
Thank you.
deeply appreciated. And I thank you for your time, and I thank you for joining us. It's an amazing presentation. You know, unfortunately, this was a great accelerator program, and we are now wrapping it up. I once again want to urge everyone to complete the survey. That information is really important to us. Like any business, we want to improve over time, and the only way we can improve is by engaging directly with participants and understanding what the needs are, what you liked a little less, and going deeper where it's appropriate. So you will receive an email request in a couple minutes from now requesting that you complete the survey. And if you are able to take a few minutes out to do that, it would be greatly appreciated. Many of you have spent all of your November Tuesdays with us, or have given us 8 to 10 hours of your time. For most of you, this is after working hours, and that really shows how serious you are about exploring opportunities in cannabis and making your dream a reality. And many of you have, and I've seen with the questions and the comments on the chat room, you've really been here for each session. You've asked questions in between sessions and really enjoyed interacting and learning from your questions. And kudos to you for taking the time to make that a career change that you're looking for, or to take advantage of that business opportunity that you see. I once again want to thank all of our sponsors. We've had amazing sponsors from ArcView, from Bridgewest Consulting, from Cresco Labs, from GTI, and many other companies. So that's really appreciated. But the last word, my friends, my fellow participants here, goes to Eric Krohn. Eric, you have been an absolutely terrific collaborator. This would not have happened without you, without the support of SUNY Binghamton, without the support of the Southern Tier Kauffman Incubator. It's been really a pleasure hosting this event with you, and learning more, quite frankly, myself also, about the business model canvas. So the last word this evening goes to you, my friend.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you, Ari. That's really kind. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. You know, really, our goal was to offer the best knowledge that we could. And Ari, between you, all the guests you arranged, Gene, Peter, I can't thank you all enough. This has been wonderful. You will hear from us again, I guarantee that, and not just the survey. And really, again, I applaud all of you for being entrepreneurs. It's a much harder task than most people think. It's a very attractive name, much harder to live. And just continue to do what you do and reach out to people that are willing to offer you good knowledge. And I truly believe everyone that's been a part of this series has done that. So thank you all. Gene, Peter, Ari, thank you so much for all you gave us. And to the next one.
Have a good evening, folks. Thank you again. Take care. Look forward to being in
you.
touch with everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Gene. Take care.